Guys, the Monster Trio. Whenever you talk about the Straw Hat Pirates, more often than not, those are the three that you're gonna focus on. LZS, the crew's true fighting force. We all understand that everybody on the Straw Hats is a threat in their own way, but these three are on another level. They're literally gunning for the Pirate King's crew. And what's not lost on a lot of people is the fact that the Straw Hats Monster Trio is meant to very closely parallel the Roger Pirates Monster Trio. As such, I believe it's very easy to use the Roger Pirates Monster Trio to kind of see where the Straw Hats Monster Trio is going to end up. And that's all what this video is going to be talking about, just kind of going through them and examining where are the Monster Trio going to end up, strength-wise and story-wise. Because this one's going to be Monster Trio Generations. And trust me, with the logic that I use here, you're actually going to want to hear it. But before we get into it, y'all, if you're rocking with me being back in Houston in the old space, please do me a favor. Like the video, okay? This is very important. Subscribe to the channel for more anime content just like this every week. And share it around with all your friends who love the series. You know we always say here, let's get it going. And make sure you subscribe to me and my boys over at CSY. Now to start out, I'm gonna actually explain something that I feel like a lot of people don't actually put into context. And that's why it's actually important that Luffy has Zoro and Sanji as his wings instead of having an officer trio like the other Yonko do. Because I know a lot of people who say Zoro, Sanji, and Jinbei together form his officer trio as a Yonko, but that's fundamentally just not what he's aiming for. The difference is that most other crews have 3 officers because they're part of a group of larger, sub-commanders that actually just stave off threats. While people like Luffy and Roger only need 2 because they're literally standing at his shoulders, not below him. This shouldn't be surprising, it's literally what the Giants were telling Usopp's group about Gaban when we first met him. Like, even if we're talking about strength relative to their captain, Zoro and Sanji are much closer to Luffy than any other commanders are to their Yonko. For example, I believe that the gap between Kaido and King is much larger than the gap between Luffy and Zoro. And alongside this, I also believe that the Yonko who hold this structure can handily defeat their top 3 officers together. Kaido could likely decimate King, Queen, and Jack at the same time. Blackbeard's entire crew was watched by Aokiji, which means I don't think it's that crazy to imagine that Blackbeard's gonna reach a level to be able to do that. And we already know for a fact that Big Mom's entire crew coming together can't stop her, because that was the whole point of her hunger pangs, let alone just the 3 sweet commanders. Even for Shanks, it may be up for discussion at this point whether it would be that hard for him to take on Lucky Roo, Ben Beckman, and the man that I hate with the passion of 1,000 burning suns. Meanwhile, towards the end of the series, I imagine that Luffy versus just Zoro and Sanji, not even including the rest of the Straw Hats, is probably gonna be a high diff, maybe even extreme diff fight. Like, there's at least a genuine discussion to be had there. In the same way that I believe that Prime Gaban and Prime Rayleigh together would push Prime Roger very far. Now, Mr. Morge made a video about this topic a couple months back, and I'll definitely link it up here so you should watch it after this one. But he makes a really excellent point as to why this may be. The difference between the other Yonko and then people like Luffy and Roger is that Luffy and Roger are purposefully looking for people to be around their level, people who can stand by their side, at their shoulders. Meanwhile, the Yonko want that clear dominance, that clear hierarchy over their subordinates. And frankly, that just comes down to demeanor. You can see it in the way that the captain acts. Again, if I say the 2 legendary wings who can support the Pirate King, you're only thinking of 2 possible duos. Because you know I'm not talking about Moji and Kabaji. Now, Roger's crew has a whole theming with gold, silver, and copper, which is obviously why the 3 of their names are spoofs of these. Which means that when we compare them to their direct counterparts on the Straw Hats, that's kind of where we can imagine them ending up. Luffy is a monster, a clear step above most. Zoro in that step below him. And Sanji, while yes below Zoro, is still a part of those conversations, to the point where people will still talk about them in the same vein. I also think that another reason people get a little bit confused about this is because they tend to conflate what Luffy has to what the other Yonko have because of his title as a Yonko. Where, okay, if Luffy is an emperor, he's gonna be like them, then in that case we need to have a similar framework. But y'all are forgetting, that's not where Luffy's goal is. Luffy was never trying to become an Emperor of the Sea. He's trying to become the Pirate King. It's a fundamentally different standard. And so in so doing, yeah, he's gonna be Yonko for a bit, but he's gonna surpass them, which is literally what he told Big Mom and Kaido after he mollywopped the ladder to the ground on the rooftop. Now, it's one thing to definitely say if you look at their roles, okay, it naturally makes sense. But a lot of people will argue that strength-wise, what we see isn't actually matching that description. A lot of people draw exact parallel lines, so they see that, oh, well, Kaido is so much higher than King and Queen is. So of course, if Luffy is going to be Kaido's direct parallel, and Zoro and Sanji are fighting King and Queen, then that's the same gap. And what I would say to this is, actually go back and watch some of these fights again. If you look back through the fights and all the arcs where you have that Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji fighting the top 3 dynamic, most of the time, as Luffy's fighting the arc boss, Zoro and Sanji have a much easier time taking care of the second and third than Luffy does the boss. It's actually pretty consistent. Even though Zoro and Sanji both took loads of damage during their fights with Mr. 1 and Mr. 2, they were able to kinda overpower them to some extent, right? Or most importantly, beat them in one battle. Luffy was defeated twice by Crocodile before spinning back the third time. In Enies Lobby, we see that Luffy was fighting the much stronger boss in Katakuri, but we see Luffy struggling too, a lot. Comparatively, Zoro and Sanji essentially one-shot both of their opponents the moment they get their power-ups. Wano is another example. Sanji literally says he can dispatch Queen easily if he wanted to turn into a heartless monster. Did not turn into the heartless monster, and then decimated him anyway. King was definitely strong, and I don't want to take that away from him, but Zoro also had multiple gimmicks going against him at that time. Needing to figure out the whole trick with King's Flames, needing to understand more about Advanced Conqueror's Haki, which he just fundamentally didn't get for a while also having his own Haki drained out by Enma. You compare that to Kaido, who genuinely took out Luffy on 4 separate occasions, one of which he literally killed him. In my mind, I've always known where I'm putting their strength at for the end of the series. I believe that Zoro and Sanji will ballpark be in the range of where we used to see Big Mom and Kaido at. Pretty interesting that they respectively had beef with said emperors. I don't think that they'll be one-shotting admirals. A one-shot is a bit too far, but defeating an admiral with little difficulty, basically the same way that Luffy low to no diffed Kizaru on Egghead, I can definitely see that. But the other thing to note is that there's a second dynamic there. It's not just about how close the fighters are to the captain, because if so, you could argue that Rocks had that. But see, this is another point that Morge made in his video, which is that you need to strike a balance between not being so much stronger than your commanders that there's a clear separation, but also not so close in strength that they can't defer to you and respect you when the moment arises. I could and probably would argue that, at least for now, Rocks' commanders, Big Mom, Shiki, Whitebeard, I would say that they were closer to him in strength than even Zoro and Sanji are to Luffy. But that's also the reason why they didn't work out. Everyone was so strong that structure collapsed because everyone was trying to lead. We're literally told time and time again, the Rocks Pirates' greatest downfall was themselves, their inability to work together, to actually be a crew. And a lot of that comes from Rocks not being a leader. Now, as I said at the beginning of this video, you can make very easy parallels between Roger and Luffy, Zoro and Rayleigh, and Sanji and Gaban, using the old guard to kind of think about what will happen to the new guard. For Roger and Luffy, there are so many things that are parallels here that it's not even funny. It's the biggest form of inherited will, arguably One Piece's biggest core theme. I mean, Luffy is literally wearing Roger's hat. Luffy and Roger have never met. And of course, you like to say, well, that's because Shanks gave him the hat. Yeah, and who gave Shanks the hat? See, everything's connected. Even when Kaido was telling Luffy that there's a whole other level to Haki that you haven't reached yet, he was referencing Roger and that's how Roger climbed to the peak. Obviously setting up that Luffy's Haki still needs to attain Roger's level, likely even surpassing him by the end of the story, now that we know that there's more. I think strength-wise, Luffy will definitely surpass Roger by the end of the series. He'll have Haki that's at least comparable to him, if not more, because he's gonna be more closer to Joy Boy. Then on top of that, you're layering a universe-breaking devil fruit. Now, one thing that can't be understated is the power that Mihawk said Luffy had during the Paramount War, the ability to naturally draw people towards you. Personally, it makes me wonder if this is an actual ability or it's just, kind of a metaphorical way of saying that's just your outgoing personality. And in fact, I would personally up it. I'd say it's not only the fact that you're drawing people towards you, but the fact that you're having people who would literally be legends in their own right still want to fight for you, all while not even doing it through fear, but just being genuine, being yourself. We obviously know that he's gonna find the One Piece like Roger and become the Pirate King, but what happens after is where it becomes different, because Luffy will be able to do what Roger couldn't, which was to bring on the dawn of the world and topple the world government system. I'm also really partial to the idea that Luffy will contract the same incurable disease that Roger got back in his day. Who knows, maybe it's something that they found on Laugh Tale, but the reason that he'll be able to survive is because he ends up being cured by Chopper, perfectly specifically tying in Chopper's storyline of being the cure-all, curing something that even the Pirate King's crew couldn't figure out. And that's how Luffy's crew is so powerful, because they have their own goals, but there's also ways for that goal to service Luffy. Now there's a few interesting things to note when comparing the right-hand men. Rayleigh's showings have been ample throughout our time in One Piece, so we can kind of already estimate where Zoro's gonna be by the end of the series, or even as an old man. Other legendary and powerful fighters themselves have a decent reverence for Rayleigh. Monkey D. Garp himself ballparks him to be around Whitebeard, at least as far as old age is concerned and everything, but just status-wise. And Blackbeard pissed his pants at the very thought of having to fight Rayleigh. So we can expect Zoro to have a similar reputation by the time the story's complete. Or maybe an even more impressive one due to the fact that he's accruing all of this at an even faster rate than Rayleigh did. But now we got the emissaries of love. And here what's really important to remember is that this is a trio dynamic for a reason. They are called the Two Wings. Everyone references them as equals. That doesn't mean that they're literally equal in terms of combat power, but what it means is that, we're meant to be talking about them together as a package deal. This isn't a power scaling thing that I'm trying to say. I would still personally take Rayleigh's strength probably over Gabon's. But what you gotta realize is what Oda's trying to say. They are ballpark around the same level. Any difference between them is so small that it's negligible. You shouldn't even be thinking about it. And so this is where I really think the Zoro and Sanji dynamic is going. Which is why I find it crazy when people start saying things like Jinbei kicked Sanji out of the top 3, or it's now the Monster Quartet. What does that mean? But based on what we're seeing with Gabon right now in Elbaf, we can expect Sanji to reach some crazy heights. He was easily dismissing Killingham's MMA creatures. And just to reframe what a feat that is, these are the strongest base army that we've ever known. And then dispatch Summers like it was nothing. So I think that it's pretty reasonable to expect Sanji to be able to do around the same things. In fact, I feel like a Sanji Summers matchup is coming up pretty soon. And then even in terms of Sanji later on, I think that Sanji could definitely end up with another race the same way that Gabon did. I mean, the chapter we meet Gabon, we literally have Luffy himself being like, wow, you're just like an old version of Sanji. How much more on the nose do you want it? Hey, the Sanji Gird shipper is going crazy, I already know it. And then I think the final thing to consider is possibly the biggest. Does Sanji also get Conqueror's Haki? Here's my take on it. It's possible. I want to say I'm very strongly for it, but it's possible. See, the argument against it used to be that the captain will never have more than one other Conqueror's member bending the knee to them. But with Roger's crew and Rox's crew, we saw that that's not true. Then they said that on the Roger crew, Roger, Rayleigh, and even Odin had it, but Gabon didn't. Meant to imply to us that Gabon was being deprioritized and therefore Sanji will as well. But then we get to Elbaf and what do you know? Gabon has advanced Conqueror's Haki. And then with the most recent chapter, I don't want to hear any of the arguments that somebody acting in a more lovey-dovey manner or having that kind of demeanor can't be a conqueror. We saw Roger himself, the Pirate King, turn into Goondi Roger whenever he saw Shaki. So while I would be fine with him not having it, because honestly he's gonna be in those conversations regardless, if he does, just don't be surprised. But I want to hear what y'all have to say. How much do you think that the current Monster Trio is going to emulate the old formula? Where do you think the 3 of their stories are heading towards the endgame of One Piece? Let me know all that and more in the comments below. That is going to be the end of the video, y'all. But before we go, real quick, like it, subscribe, and share it around with all your friends who love the series or anime and manga in general. As I always say, I'm trying to build a community, but I need your help to do it. That's going to be all from me. I'll catch y'all next time. And always remember, One Piece, one life. Hey, ain't it also funny that Buggy has 2 commanders in Crocodile and Mihawk? Say what you want about him, but hey, he's definitely fitting the bill. Plus, he was on Roger's crew, so the inherited will aspect makes sense, especially with his recent declaration of, I actually want to find the One Piece. So look, all I'm saying is, when he eventually stumbles his way into Pirate King status, let's not all act surprised now.